The waters of the Pacific Ocean churned silently beneath the surface as the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-58 glided through the depths. It was early 1943, and the crew aboard the vessel maintained a quiet confidence that had become characteristic of Japan's submarine fleet. They had good reason for their assurance. Their torpedoes were considered among the finest in the world. The Type 93, nicknamed the Long Lance by Allied forces, was a marvel of engineering that outclassed anything the Americans or British had developed. With an extraordinary range of up to 40 kilometers, a powerful warhead, and the unique feature of leaving no visible wake, these oxygen-propelled torpedoes had earned a fearsome reputation throughout the Pacific theater. Commander Yoshiro Tanaka stood in the control room of the I-58, his weathered face illuminated by the dim red lighting. He had served in the Imperial Navy for 15 years and had witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of Japanese torpedo technology. "Our submarines are the silent samurai of the Emperor," he often told his crew. "And our torpedoes are the swords that will cut through the heart of the American fleet." The men believed him. Reports of successful attacks against Allied shipping had boosted morale throughout the Japanese submarine service. American and British anti-submarine warfare tactics seemed primitive and ineffective against the stealth and power of the Japanese submarines. The early years of the war in the Pacific had seen the Japanese submarine fleet wreak havoc on Allied shipping lanes. Unlike the German U-boats in the Atlantic that focused primarily on merchant shipping, Japanese submarines targeted military vessels, striking fear into the hearts of Allied naval commanders. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis and numerous other warships had demonstrated the lethal efficiency of Japan's underwater fleet. Allied destroyers, equipped with only basic sonar and depth charges, struggled to counter this threat. The depth charges they deployed would sink slowly behind their vessels, detonating at predetermined depths, often giving Japanese submarine commanders ample time to maneuver away from danger. In the secret naval laboratories of Britain, however, a revolution in anti-submarine warfare was taking shape. Commander Alistair Wilson of the Royal Navy had grown frustrated with the limitations of conventional depth charges. "By the time our charges reach the depth where we think the submarine is, it's already moved elsewhere," he explained to his team of engineers. "What we need is a weapon that strikes immediately, directly where the submarine is detected." This insight led to the development of a new weapon system codenamed Hedgehog. Unlike depth charges, the Hedgehog would fire a pattern of 24 small projectiles ahead of a ship. These projectiles would sink quickly and only detonate upon contact with a solid object, like a submarine's hull. The silence before detonation meant submarine crews would have no warning until it was too late. By mid-1943, the Hedgehog had been deployed to Allied ships in the Pacific, though its existence remained a closely guarded secret. Captain Robert Harrison of the USS Fletcher, a destroyer assigned to escort duty in the Solomon Islands, received the new weapon with skepticism. "It looks like a bizarre organ pipe," he remarked to his executive officer as they examined the installation on their forward deck. "Hard to believe this contraption will do what conventional depth charges can't." The weapon's unusual appearance, multiple spigot mortars arranged in a circular pattern, had earned it its distinctive name. Training began immediately, with sonar operators learning to coordinate with the Hedgehog gunners for precise targeting. Meanwhile, on board the I-58, Commander Tanaka received new orders. His submarine was to patrol the shipping lanes near Guadalcanal, where American supply convoys were supporting the ongoing island campaign. "Our intelligence suggests minimal escort protection," his orders read. "Ideal conditions for our superior torpedo technology." Tanaka assembled his crew and outlined their mission. "The Americans believe their waters are safe," he told them. "We will show them the reach of the Emperor's sword." The submarine departed from its base at Rabaul, slipping beneath the waves with the predatory grace that had become the hallmark of the Imperial submarine fleet. The convoy designated SG-7 departed from Espiritu Santo on a calm morning, consisting of 5 transport ships carrying essential supplies and reinforcements for the American forces on Guadalcanal. The USS Fletcher led the escort, accompanied by the destroyer USS O'Bannon. Captain Harrison stood on the bridge, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. The intelligence reports had warned of increased Japanese submarine activity in the area. "Maintain sonar sweeps every 2 minutes, he ordered. "I want to know immediately if anything is detected." Below decks, the sonar operators listened intently for the telltale sounds of a submarine's engines or propellers. The Hedgehog team stood ready at their stations, though many remained doubtful about the new weapon's effectiveness. 70 feet below the surface, Commander Tanaka observed the convoy through his periscope. "Perfect," he whispered, noting the positions of the escorts. Just as expected, minimal protection. The I-58 had managed to position itself ahead of the convoy's path, an ideal position for an ambush. Tanaka calculated the speed and course of the lead transport ship, then ordered the submarine to descend to 100 feet to prepare for attack. "Flood tubes 1 through 4, he commanded. "Target the largest transport vessel." The torpedo officers acknowledged the order, preparing the deadly long-lance torpedoes. These weapons were the pride of the Japanese Navy, faster, more powerful, and with longer range than anything in the Allied arsenal. On board the USS Fletcher, sonar operator second class James Wilson suddenly tensed. "Contact bearing 030, range approximately 1,500 yards, he reported urgently. "Definite submarine signature, sir." Captain Harrison rushed to the sonar station, listening to the distinctive sounds himself. "That's a Japanese boat for sure," he confirmed. "Battle stations!" The alarm rang throughout the destroyer as sailors rushed to their positions. On the forward deck, the Hedgehog team removed the safety locks from their new weapon, preparing it for its first real combat test. "This is not a drill," the weapons officer announced. "Sonar has confirmed an enemy submarine preparing to attack the convoy." Commander Tanaka gave the order to fire. 4 torpedoes launched from the I-58 with a burst of compressed air, their oxygen-powered engines leaving virtually no wake as they sped toward the American transport ships. "Now we wait," Tanaka told his crew with confidence. 4 minutes until impact. The submarine began a gentle turn, preparing to change position after the attack as per standard procedure. In previous engagements, this tactic had allowed Japanese submarines to evade the slow, predictable response of Allied depth charges. By the time the Americans realized they were under attack and deployed their depth charges, the I-58 would be well away from the danger zone. Aboard the USS Fletcher, sonar detected the launch immediately. "Torpedoes in the water!" Wilson shouted. Captain Harrison had to make an instant decision. Rather than following the standard procedure of dropping depth charges after the torpedo attack, he gave a new order. "All ahead full. Bring us directly over that submarine's position." The destroyer surged forward, its engines straining as it raced to position itself above, where sonar indicated the Japanese submarine was now located. The convoy ships began emergency evasive maneuvers based on radio warnings from the Fletcher. "Prepare the Hedgehog for firing," Harrison ordered. "This is what we've been training for." Commander Tanaka was in the process of ordering a deeper dive when his sonar operator reported with alarm, "Captain, the American destroyer is heading directly toward us at full speed." This was unexpected. Standard Allied procedure was to drop depth charges behind their ships while moving away from the submarine's last known position. "Increase depth to 150 feet, emergency dive," Tanaka ordered, realizing that something was different about this encounter. The I-58 pitched downward, its ballast tanks filling rapidly to increase the descent rate. But the American destroyer was closing too quickly. On the forward deck of the USS Fletcher, the Hedgehog team made final adjustments based on sonar data. "Target locked," the weapon officer reported. Captain Harrison gave the order, "Fire." With a series of pneumatic thumps, 24 projectiles launched from the Hedgehog, arcing through the air before plunging into the ocean in a pattern designed to blanket the area where the submarine was calculated to be. Unlike depth charges, these projectiles made almost no sound as they sank rapidly through the water. They would only detonate upon contact with a solid object, such as a submarine's hull. Aboard the I-58, Commander Tanaka and his crew heard the unusual sound of objects entering the water above them. It was different from the distinctive splash of depth charges, and there was no detonation. For a moment, Tanaka thought they might have escaped detection after all. Then, without warning, a tremendous explosion rocked the submarine as one of the Hedgehog projectiles made direct contact with the hull. The detonation triggered several more projectiles that had landed nearby. The submarine shuddered violently, and warning alarms blared throughout the vessel. "Hull breach in compartment 4. The damage control officer shouted over the chaos. "Taking on water rapidly." Tanaka struggled to comprehend what had happened. This was unlike any anti-submarine attack they had previously encountered. The The sonar operators on the USS Fletcher heard the explosions clearly. "Multiple detonations confirmed, sir," Wilson reported excitedly. Captain Harrison ordered the destroyer to circle back for another attack if necessary, but the sonar soon picked up the unmistakable sounds of a submarine breaking apart. "She's going down, Captain," Wilson confirmed, his voice solemn despite the victory. The Hedgehog had proven devastatingly effective in its first real combat test. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths regardless of whether a submarine was present, the Hedgehog's contact-fused projectiles had scored direct hits on the Japanese vessel, giving its crew no time to evade. News of the I-58's destruction spread rapidly through the Allied Naval Command in the Pacific. Detailed reports of the Hedgehog's performance were compiled and analyzed, confirming what its British developers had hoped. This new weapon represented a fundamental shift in anti-submarine warfare. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, issued an order prioritizing the installation of Hedgehog systems on all escort vessels. "This weapon changes the equation," he noted in his directive. "For the first time, we have the advantage against enemy submarines." The weapon's success remained classified, ensuring that Japanese naval intelligence would not immediately understand the new threat their submarines faced. Japanese Submarine Command noticed the disappearance of the I-58, but initially attributed it to conventional anti-submarine measures or perhaps mechanical failure. It was only after several more submarines failed to return from patrol that patterns began to emerge. Reports from the few submarines that survived encounters with Allied escorts mentioned a new type of attack. Multiple explosions occurring simultaneously, with no warning sounds of approaching depth charges. Admiral Minechi Koga, commander of the combined fleet following Admiral Yamamoto's death, convened an emergency meeting of his submarine warfare experts. "Something has changed in the Americans' capabilities," he told them grimly. "We need to understand what we're facing." By early 1944, the deployment of the Hedgehog had expanded beyond American and British vessels to include Australian and New Zealand ships involved in Pacific operations. Training programs were established to ensure crews could maximize the weapon's effectiveness. The impact on Japanese submarine operations was dramatic. Where once they had operated with near impunity, they now faced a weapon that could strike with precision and without warning. The psychological effect on Japanese submarine crews was profound. The mysterious new weapon that could find and destroy them without the telltale warning of depth charge explosions created an atmosphere of dread. Some crews began referring to areas of heavy Allied naval presence as ghost waters, places where submarines disappeared without explanation. The strategic implications of the Hedgehog extended beyond direct submarine kills. Japanese Naval Command, increasingly concerned about the unexplained losses, began to restrict submarine operations, keeping them farther from Allied shipping lanes and limiting their aggressive tactics. This reduction in Japanese submarine effectiveness came at a crucial time, as the Allied island-hopping campaign gained momentum. Supply convoys that once would have been prime targets for Japanese torpedoes now moved with greater security, ensuring that American forces received the equipment and reinforcements needed for their westward advance across the Pacific. In the final years of the war, the Hedgehog underwent further refinements. With improved targeting systems and more powerful projectiles, its success rate against enemy submarines far exceeded that of conventional depth charges, with some studies suggesting it was up to 9 times more effective. The weapon that had begun as an experimental project in British naval laboratories had transformed into one of the Allies' most significant technological advantages in the Pacific campaign. For the Japanese submarine service, the weapon represented the end of their era of superiority. The long-lance torpedoes, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, were rendered increasingly ineffective not by superior torpedo technology, but by a revolution in how submarines were hunted and destroyed. As Allied forces closed in on the Japanese home islands in 1945, the once mighty Japanese submarine fleet had been reduced to a fraction of its former strength. The few remaining submarine commanders understood the grim reality. The waters of the Pacific had become a hunting ground where their vessels were the prey. The weapon they called the Spiny Devil, a reference to both the Hedgehog's appearance and its lethal effectiveness, had changed the nature of undersea warfare. The superior Japanese torpedoes, which had struck fear into Allied naval forces in the early years of the war, had been rendered strategically irrelevant by a weapon that ensured those torpedoes would rarely reach their targets. In the final analysis of the Pacific War, military historians would identify the Hedgehog as one of several technological innovations that tilted the balance decisively in favor of Allied forces. Like radar, code breaking, and the proximity fuse, it represented the kind of asymmetric advantage that could overcome even the most advanced conventional weapons. The Japanese long-lance torpedo remained technically superior to its Allied counterparts until the war's end. But this superiority meant little when the submarines carrying those torpedoes could be detected and destroyed with unprecedented effectiveness. The Hedgehog had proven that innovation in defensive systems could neutralize even the most feared offensive weapons. It was a lesson in military technology that would influence naval warfare doctrine for decades to come, long after the waters of the Pacific had returned to peace. The end of the Pacific War did not mark the end of the Hedgehog's influence on naval warfare. In the immediate aftermath of Japan's surrender, Allied naval intelligence teams descended upon Japanese naval bases to examine the remnants of their once formidable submarine fleet. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Thomas Blackwood, who had served aboard the destroyer USS Melvin during the war's final campaigns. His mission was to document the technical specifications of the long-lance torpedoes and assess how the Japanese had adapted, or failed to adapt, to the Hedgehog threat. What we found was revealing. Blackwood wrote in his classified report. The Japanese had begun developing countermeasures, including acoustic baffling to reduce sonar signatures and deeper diving capabilities. But these efforts came too late to affect the war's outcome. His inspection team discovered blueprints for a planned successor to the long-lance torpedo that would have included a counter-detection system designed to alert submarine crews to active sonar pings, a direct response to the Hedgehog's targeting mechanism. The weapon had never progressed beyond the prototype stage, hampered by Japan's increasingly limited industrial capacity as Allied bombing intensified. In Tokyo Bay, where the mighty Japanese fleet had once assembled before embarking on its conquest of the Pacific, a small contingent of surviving submarine officers was interviewed by Allied intelligence. Commander Hiroshi Nakamura, one of the few submarine commanders to have encountered the Hedgehog and lived, described the psychological impact of the weapon. Before we knew the pattern of your attacks, we could hear the depth charges entering the water, count the seconds, and take evasive action, he explained through an interpreter. With the Hedgehog, there was only silence, then sudden destruction. It changed how we operated. We became hesitant, less aggressive. The hunter had become the hunted. American naval strategists incorporated these insights into post-war planning. Captain Everett Thompson of the Naval Warfare Analysis Group compiled a comprehensive study titled Submarine Countermeasures in the Pacific Theater, which became required reading at the Naval War College. The Hedgehog demonstrated a fundamental principle in warfare, Thompson concluded. Technical superiority in offensive weapons can be neutralized by innovation in defensive systems. The Japanese placed their faith in the perfect torpedo but failed to anticipate how quickly we could develop new methods to prevent those torpedoes from being deployed effectively. As tensions with the Soviet Union escalated into the Cold War, the lessons learned from the Hedgehog's success influenced a new generation of anti-submarine weapons. In 1950, the Weapon Alpha entered service with the U.S. Navy, building on the Hedgehog's ahead-throwing concept, but adding rocket propulsion and a more sophisticated targeting system. This was followed by the ASROC anti-submarine rocket system in the late 1950s, which extended the range and lethality of ship-based anti-submarine weapons considerably. The Royal Navy, which had pioneered the original Hedgehog, developed its own successor, the Squid Mortar system. Vice Admiral Sir Anthony Morse, who had been involved in the Hedgehog's initial deployment, oversaw its implementation. "We took what worked with the Hedgehog and refined it," he explained to his staff. "The principle remains the same. Strike quickly, strike precisely, and give the submarine no opportunity to evade." The Squid's three-barrel design allowed for more comprehensive coverage and increased the likelihood of a direct hit. Former crewmen from both Allied and Japanese vessels occasionally met at naval reunions in the decades following the war. At one such event in San Diego in 1962, James Wilson, the sonar operator from USS Fletcher who had detected the I-58, found himself seated across from Takeo Yoshida, who had served as a torpedo officer aboard the Japanese submarine I-47. Their conversation, initially awkward, eventually turned to technical discussions of their respective weapon systems. "Your long lance was a magnificent weapon," Wilson admitted. "Nothing we had could match its range or power." Yoshida nodded in acknowledgement before responding. "But your Hedgehog made it irrelevant." "The finest torpedo is useless if the submarine carrying it cannot survive to launch it." The two men, once mortal enemies, shared a moment of professional respect for the technological chess match that had played out beneath the Pacific waves. The Naval Archives in Washington, D.C. gradually declassified documents relating to the Hedgehog's development and deployment, revealing the extensive testing and refinement process that had preceded its combat introduction. Dr. Eleanor Saunders, a naval historian specializing in World War II technology, published a definitive account of the weapon's impact in her 1975 book, Silent Victory: Anti-Submarine Warfare in the Pacific. Her research uncovered that by the war's end, Hedgehog-equipped vessels had achieved a kill probability nearly 10 times greater than those relying solely on conventional depth charges. What made the Hedgehog so revolutionary wasn't just its mechanical design, Saunders wrote, but how it fundamentally altered the psychology of submarine warfare. Japanese commanders, accustomed to dictating the terms of underwater engagement with their superior torpedoes, suddenly found themselves vulnerable in ways they hadn't anticipated. The confidence that had characterized their early war operations eroded rapidly as reports of submarines lost to this new weapon filtered back to command in the naval museums that sprang up in coastal cities across America in the post-war years. The Hedgehog often occupied a prominent position. At the Pacific War Memorial Museum in Pearl Harbor, a restored Hedgehog launcher stood beside a captured long-lance torpedo, a visual representation of the technological duel that had played out across the Pacific. Retired Navy Captain Robert Harrison, who had commanded the USS Fletcher during that first successful Hedgehog attack, often visited the exhibit and spoke with tourists about his experiences. People tend to focus on the big gun battles, the aircraft carriers, the island assaults, Harrison told a documentary filmmaker in 1980. But the war beneath the waves was just as crucial. When we first received the Hedgehog, many of us were skeptical. It didn't look like much, certainly not like something that could counter the feared long lance. But that's the nature of innovation in warfare. Sometimes the most significant advantages come in unlikely packages. The technological rivalry between offensive and defensive systems that the Hedgehog and long lance exemplified continued into modern naval warfare. The development of nuclear submarines in the 1950s triggered new innovations in anti-submarine technology, including towed array sonars and magnetic anomaly detection. Each advance in submarine stealth prompted corresponding improvements in detection and attack systems, a perpetual cycle that naval strategists came to recognize as inevitable. Commander Yoshiro Tanaka's final log entries, recovered from the wreckage of I-58 during a 1984 deep-sea exploration of Pacific war graves, provided a poignant epilogue to the Hedgehog's story. His last written words, translated by Japanese naval historians, read, "We sail with the finest weapons in the Imperial Navy's arsenal, confident in our training and technology. May we prove worthy of the Emperor's trust." The log, now preserved in the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force Museum in Yokosuka, serves as a reminder of how quickly technological advantage can shift in warfare. By the 1990s, as computerization revolutionized naval combat systems, the direct descendants of the Hedgehog had been replaced by sophisticated torpedo systems launched from ships and aircraft. Yet military academics continued to cite the Hedgehog as a case study in asymmetric technological response. At the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia, Commander Sarah Matthews included the Hedgehog in her lectures on combat innovation. What made the Hedgehog effective wasn't just its technical specifications, she told her students. It was how it exploited a fundamental vulnerability in Japanese submarine tactics that their superior torpedo technology had led them to overlook: the wreckage of numerous Japanese submarines. Victims of the Hedgehog became artificial reefs across the Pacific Ocean floor. Marine biologists studying these underwater ecosystems in the early 2000s noted how these vessels, once instruments of war, now hosted diverse marine life. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, grandson of Commander Yoshiro Tanaka, participated in one such expedition to the remains of the I-58. standing on the research vessel above the site where his grandfather's submarine lay. He reflected on the technological battle that had claimed so many lives on both sides. My grandfather believed in the superiority of Japanese torpedo technology, he told his colleagues, and he was not wrong. The long lance was indeed a remarkable achievement. What he could not have known was that the true advantage in warfare often lies not in having the best weapon, but in finding an innovative way to prevent your enemy from using theirs effectively. The Hedgehog did exactly that. The lessons of the Hedgehog's success against the long lance continue to influence modern military thinking about asymmetric responses to technological advantages. When Admiral Jonathan Parsons addressed the graduating class at Annapolis in 2015, he referenced this historical example explicitly. Throughout your careers, you will encounter situations where an adversary appears to hold a decisive technological edge. Remember the lesson of the Hedgehog. Sometimes the most effective counter to a superior weapon is not to build a better version of the same weapon, but to change the nature of the engagement entirely. Naval warfare scholars now recognize that the development of the Hedgehog represented more than just a technical innovation. It signaled a paradigm shift in anti-submarine doctrine. Dr. Raymond Chen's 2018 analysis, Proactive versus Reactive ASW, The Hedgehog Revolution, outlined how this weapon transformed anti-submarine warfare from a primarily defensive, reactive posture to a proactive hunting strategy. Before the Hedgehog, Chen wrote, destroyers essentially waited for submarines to attack before responding with depth charges. After the Hedgehog, escort vessels became active hunters, aggressively pursuing contact with enemy submarines to destroy them before they could launch their torpedoes. As the last veterans of the Pacific Submarine War passed away, their oral histories preserved in naval archives provided personal dimensions to the technological narrative. Sonarman First Class Daniel Miller, who had served aboard the destroyer USS England, credited with sinking 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days using the Hedgehog, recalled the mixture of excitement and solemnity that accompanied each successful attack. When we confirmed a kill, there was no cheering, he recounted in a 2005 interview. We knew that despite being our enemies, those were sailors like us, doing their duty as they saw it. The Hedgehog was devastatingly effective, but we never forgot the human cost of that effectiveness. Today, in naval war games conducted by fleets around the world, strategists still reference the Hedgehog long lance dynamic when discussing technological countermeasures. The principle that a targeted defensive innovation can neutralize even the most sophisticated offensive capability remains a cornerstone of military planning. As submarine and anti-submarine technology continues to evolve with increasingly sophisticated sensors, stealth materials, and autonomous systems, naval commanders study the historical lesson of how a seemingly simple weapon, a cluster of mortars, mounted on a destroyer's deck, changed the course of undersea warfare in the world's largest ocean. The enduring legacy of the Hedgehog lies not merely in its technical specifications or combat record, but in how it demonstrated that technological innovation, properly applied at a crucial moment, can fundamentally alter the balance of power in warfare. The Japanese long-lance torpedo, for all its advanced features and fearsome reputation, could not overcome the strategic advantage conferred by a weapon that changed the rules of engagement. In the ceaseless cycle of measure and countermeasure that characterizes military technology, the Hedgehog stands as a testament to the power of innovative thinking to overcome even the most daunting technological challenges. In naval academies across the world, instructors continue to cite this historical example when teaching aspiring officers about the principles of naval warfare. Never assume that technical superiority in one area guarantees victory, they caution. The Hedgehog proved that innovation can come from unexpected directions, rendering even the most advanced weapons ineffective. It is a lesson that extends beyond military applications, reminding us that ingenuity and adaptation often triumph over raw technical advantage. A principle is relevant in the digital age as it was in the desperate naval battles of the Pacific War. As naval historians continue to study the technological battles of World War II, the Hedgehog long lance dynamic remains a powerful reminder of warfare's eternal truth. No weapon, however advanced, exists in isolation from the tactics and countermeasures developed to neutralize it. In museums around the world, where the physical remnants of these weapons are displayed, Visitors often pause longest before the unassuming Hedgehog launcher, its simple appearance belying its revolutionary impact. The sailors who once operated these weapons have largely passed into history now, but the principle they demonstrated lives on, that innovation, timing, and strategic application can overcome even the most fearsome technological advantages. In the silent depths where Japanese submarines once prowled with their deadly long-lance torpedoes, only the corroding wrecks remain, enduring monuments to a pivotal moment when a humble Hedgehog forever changed the nature of warfare beneath the waves. The end.